Ave Maria in the Afternoon is a co-production of Ave Maria Radio and EWTN Radio and carried across the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. Welcome to Ave Maria in the Afternoon, examining the world through the lens of faith from the heart of the Church to help us navigate the culture. Here's Dr. Marcus Peter.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us on this hour of Ave Maria in the Afternoon. I'm Marcus Peter. I'd like to begin by talking with our friend Greg Popcak about conflict resolution in marriage. Greg and Lisa suggest a new method of conflict resolution called compassionate problem resolution in marriage. And they tell us more about just how to engage it. But one of the primary premises of such a method is that we presume the good of the other. And it's a brilliant exercise in Christian virtue when resolving conflict in marriage. We go on from there to speak with Daniel Gallagher. Pope Francis's promotion of architect Antoni Gaudi to venerable last April, amidst actually the ongoing scandal of the formerly celebrated artist, last April, Jesuit Father Marco Rupnik, created an interesting juxtaposition. The Church confronts the legacy of Rupnik. The sanctity of Antoni Gaudi raises enduring questions about what sacred art reveals about the soul of its maker. And so Daniel Gallagher and I will be talking about that. And then finally we speak with Dr. Paul Seaton. Blaise Pascal was perhaps one of the first, one could call him a secular Christian apologist, in that he did apologetics for Christianity while still working very much in the secular sphere. And he attempted to address modern human beings on their own terms, to present a defense of the Christian religion that still resonates to this very day. And so we remember Pascal for his wager. And we're going to talk at length about the expanded understanding of the premise of the wager. And so a kind of moral calculus, if you will, for exactly how we ought to think about the reality of faith from a logical perspective. And frankly, it really is an application of logic. And if we understand that right, then we can quite frankly come to grapple with the fact that Christianity is a reasonable religion, that Christ is truly Logos. And Pascal, a mathematician, understood this order of reasoning rightly in terms of the application of his faith. He had a kind of mysticism that he subscribed to in his Christian faith, but he really was a Christian apologist, which is the call for all of us. All this we talk about after the headlines.
Thanks, Marcus. Good afternoon, everyone. This is your Ave Maria Radio News for Tuesday, October 7th. It's the Feast of Our Lady of the Rosary. Today's news brought to you by Ave Maria University. Your vocation location is at avemaria.edu. The federal government shutdown now in its fourth longest in the nation's history. NBC's Tom Costello reporting that essential federal employees, such as those who work for the FAA, are still on the job but aren't being paid.
The government shutdown is now rippling into air traffic control towers in Newark, in Denver, and in Phoenix. Long delays due to staffing yesterday, according to the FAA. In Burbank, the air traffic control tower left completely unmanned overnight for roughly 6 hours.
Meanwhile, 1.3 million active duty troops are slated to miss their first paycheck on October 15th. Social Security will continue to pay out benefits. Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Programs benefits will continue as funding allows. The Postal Service will continue to operate as it's not dependent on funding from Congress. Plenty of fireworks when Attorney General Pam Bondi appeared before senators on Capitol Hill. Democrats accused Bondi of going after President Trump's political foes, while Bondi accused them of turning a blind eye when Trump was being prosecuted.
What conversations you've had with President Trump about the indictment of James Comey?
No one is above the law, not even the president. That's a quote from you.
When you saw that
No one is above the law. That was your quote.
Bondi also faced questions about drone strikes on alleged drug cartels and the Jeffrey Epstein files. The daughter of an acclaimed author and cultural commentator, Jordan Peterson, is asking for prayers for her father's health. In a viral video posted this week, Michaela Peterson says her father has spent nearly a month in the intensive care unit fighting pneumonia and sepsis, calling her father's condition near death. From your AveMariaRadio.net news desk, I'm Steve Clark.
afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peters. Joining me is our friend Dr. Gregory Popcak, as he does every week, today to talk about couple conflict, which is something that he and his bride Lisa, who co-host together More to Life, produced by EWTN, talk about rather frequently. Greg, thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's always the pleasure is all mine. Always a joy to connect with you. And couple conflict. You and Lisa speak about this rather frequently, and my bride and I actually benefit a lot from the Catholic counsel that you offer. So let's frame the issue here based on what are some of the underlying problems that pertain to couple conflict?
Well, I would say that to begin with, most of us learn how to deal with relationship conflict from the way we were disciplined as kids. The approach that our parents took to correcting our behavior or correcting offenses tends to write a script for us for how we deal with our spouse when they upset us or offend us. And a lot of times we learn some kind of unhealthy ways of dealing with those things. And I think when you even just put it in that perspective, things start to snap into focus because, of course, we can't punish our spouse for various offenses. But a lot of times we do try, and when we do, we get in trouble. So we recommend an approach to discipline called discipleship discipline, which is rooted in the teachings of St. John Bosco. And that basically has parents helping their children identify what they were trying to do, what the intention was behind the offensive or inappropriate behavior, and then working with the child to teach them healthier ways to express those intentions or meet those needs. In adulthood, we call that same approach compassionate problem resolution, CPR, where we can restart the heart of your marriage and your relationship. And the idea is the same. It's, when your spouse does something that's irritating or hurtful or offensive, they're not trying to hurt you. Now, when I say that, couples will sometimes, well, but he called me that name, or he did that offensive thing, and clearly he was trying to hurt me. No, the action was certainly hurtful. I'm not justifying that, but there was a need that your spouse was trying to meet or an intention they were trying to serve. They did it in a ham-fisted, inappropriate way, but there still was something good they were trying to accomplish. And the best way to approach someone then is to say, look, I don't know what you were trying to do, but what you did or said was really kind of hurtful, and I'd like to talk through how we could handle this better next time. Right, so you're coming alongside of your spouse and you're working together against the problem instead of treating each other as if you were the problem, which is a big shift because as soon as we start treating our spouse as the problem, they stop listening to what we're saying and they become defensive, they start justifying their behavior, they start reacting to us. Well, what about you? You're the one who... But if we can come along and say, look, when you did that, it really did hurt my feelings. I'm sure that's not what you were trying to do, though. What were you trying to do? And can we talk together and pray together about how to handle these similar situations differently the next time they come up?
And that means presupposing the good, which you and Lisa talk about very often, that presupposing the good from the other. And the second thing is approaching this, making sure to approach this from an approach, a paradigm of charity, so that we can solve the issue rather than confront the person.
Yeah, when I first learned this idea that behind every behavior, even the obnoxious and irritating and offensive ones, was some need or positive intention attempting to be expressed, I did a little experiment with myself. Because I realized that there were lots of times where I irritated people or upset them or did frustrating things. And so I would ask myself, well, what was I trying to do? When that person got mad at me or when I offended that person, what was I actually going for there? And I started to see that, in fact, I wasn't trying to upset them. I wasn't antagonizing them on purpose, but I was trying to go for this intention or meet that need. And I did it maybe in a poor way or a way that was misunderstood. And then the next step I did was I started to look at, well, what if that was true of other people too? What if I wasn't uniquely sainted and so holy that only I had positive intentions or needs that I was trying to express, but everybody was in the same boat? And I would start to not necessarily make excuses for other people's behavior, but at least say, what do I think they might have been trying to go after? which then allowed me to start feeling a whole lot more charitably toward all the people in my life and be able to approach them in this way that I'm describing, that allows us to be able to say, look, nobody is out to be the enemy. Nobody is out to antagonize other people. We're just all trying to meet our needs the best way we know how. Sometimes we do a terrible job of it. Sometimes our feelings get in the way. But behind it all, there is some positive intention or need. And if we can come alongside that person and say, look, what were you trying to do? Because the way that came across was really hurtful. It was not productive. But look, we're all in that boat sometimes. If we had to do it over again, how could I help you meet that need in a way that would actually work for both of us? And it gives us a way to actually problem solve it together instead of treating the other person as if they were the problem. And like you were mentioning, a lot of these conflict styles are things we learn when we are children. If you could dive a little deeper into just how entrenched that can be, and from there, just steps to overcome that. Yeah, I think that the usual approach that parents take toward behavior is not so much changing behavior, it's just saying knock it off, right? Whether we actually say the words knock it off or we just punish the bad behavior in the expectation that good behavior will spontaneously erupt, we basically take that same approach to our spouse then. When we grow up, it's like, they do something that's hurtful, and I can't believe you would do that. We get mad at them, and then we, sort of emotionally punish them so that they know that they shouldn't do that again. But we don't actually figure out what to do in similar situations the next time it comes up, right? So they don't have any better way to approach us. So they're either faced with the choice of not expressing their needs to us or not telling us what their feelings are, or just sitting there and stewing and letting it come up in some other bad way in the future. But if I can start to realize that those patterns that I learned in childhood didn't really give me a map for handling adult conflict, then I'm able to start saying, I can leave that old script behind and I can learn some new ways. Because the way the right brain works is it makes comparisons, right? It'll say, well, this present situation is just like that situation in the past, even if it isn't. Right? If it looks superficially the same, my right brain says, well, they're exactly alike. So if my wife says something that reminds me of something my mom said when I was 5 years old, my right brain will say, yeah, you know what, you should probably pout now. Or you should probably have a tantrum now, because that's what you did when you were 5. But if I can step out of that and say, that is the way we handled things when I was little, but I'm not little anymore, and my wife isn't my mom, and we're in a very different situation than we were, so maybe I need to learn some new steps. And if I can consciously start teasing apart the differences between my present circumstances and where I learned to handle those circumstances as a kid, then I can start giving myself permission to apply new rules to the new situation. And those new rules would, like you mentioned, ground us back in not just the theology of the body, but simple Catholic virtuous premises, presuming the good of the individual, approaching from charity, and trying to resolve the conflict for the sake of mutual growth. Well, that's absolutely right. And so, it enables us to practice the art of charitable interpretation, as St. Ignatius of Loyola put it. The idea that we're not excusing bad behavior. We're not just saying, oh, well, they did that because. But really saying they were trying to do something good. It didn't come off well. Let's work together to figure out how to handle that better in the future. And I think that's really a source of intimacy in marriage where we can make it safe to make mistakes. In a lot of relationships, it isn't safe to make mistakes. I say the wrong thing, I do the wrong thing, and all of a sudden I'm being punished for it, or I'm being treated like the enemy, and I'm not being helped to do better. But when we use this process, this CPR, Compassionate Problem Resolution process, we're able to cooperate with the healing grace of marriage, to open up our hearts, be able to be vulnerable with each other and say, look, I'm struggling to express this need, or to express this desire, or this intention that I have. But I know I can come to you, and we can figure out how to handle that together. And that's a beautiful thing, because then we stop treating each other like enemies, and we treat each other as struggling disciples of Christ who are helping each other stay on the path and learn from each other and our experiences. Right. Well, Greg, as usual, a tremendous wealth of wisdom. Thank you very much for offering this to us. My guest has been Dr. Gregory Popcak. He and his bride Lisa host More to Life on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network, and they also produce the Catholic HOM app.
Households on Mission. Download it and transform our family. We've been talking about couple conflict and how to solve it from a Christian perspective. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.
Underwritten in part by this not-for-profit.
A great Bible study leads to an encounter with Jesus Christ that compels you to share your faith with others. This Advent, join Catholics across the country starting November the 5th for Bible Across America, a nationwide 7-week Bible study on Jesus as Teacher and Lord, spearheaded by our sponsor, the St. Paul Center for Biblical Theology, with some of today's leading Catholic voices. Join the nationwide Bible study by visiting stpaulcenter.com/Advent.
Ave Maria in the Afternoon is underwritten by the following nonprofit organization: Real Estate for Life. Buying or selling your home or business property? Real Estate for Life can connect you with one of 1,400 pro-life real estate agents around the world. When Real Estate for Life receives a referral fee, they donate 70% to Ave Maria Radio and Human Life International. More information at realestateforlife.org or 877-LIFE-US1. That's realestateforlife.org.
Ave Maria School of Law is the Roman Catholic law school in the United States. Consistently ranked in the Princeton Review as one of the best and most conservative law schools, as well as pre-law's most devout law school. Ave Maria School of Law provides a traditional legal education while emphasizing how the law intersects with the Catholic intellectual tradition and natural law philosophy. Ave Maria School of Law, unabashedly Catholic, consistently excellent. For more information, visit avemarialaw.edu.
When the need for senior care arises, home is where the heart is. Visiting Angels provides home care for mom or dad up to 24 hours per day, including personal care, meals, and light housework. You may select your professional caregiver with Visiting Angels. More information at visitingangels.com or at 877-374-LIVE. That's 877-374-LIVE. Visiting Angels, America's choice in senior home care.
Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. Pope Francis's promotion of architect Antoni Gaudi to Venerable, this was last April, amid the ongoing scandal of formerly celebrated artist Marco Rubnik, creates an interesting juxtaposition. The Church confronts the legacy of Marco Rubnik, but the sanctity of Antoni Gaudi also raises enduring questions about what sacred art reveals about the soul of its maker. Daniel Gallagher joins us. Daniel is a lecturer in literature and philosophy at Ralston College in Savannah, Georgia. Daniel, thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm doing well. Pleasure to be with you again and with your listeners.
Well, always a joy to reconnect with you. Now, this is a difficult situation. It's not like the resolution to this is immediately apparent, but in juxtaposition to Father Gaudi, can you please present to us the situation and what's going on?
Yes. So with Father Rubnik, it was quite scandalous that there were accusations, serious ones, which had been, in fact, corroborated by investigations of sexual abuse, serial sexual abuse of women. And this really created a problem for those who knew his prolific output as an artist. And I remember receiving several calls of those who basically said that regardless of the aesthetic value of what he's produced, I can't help but think of his crimes. And this prompted me to think kind of deeply on how basically we kind of evaluate artwork and the moral value of it based upon the depravity of an artist at times. So that's the issue, is that this is a man that is very prolific. He has very high profile mosaics and other artworks throughout the world. And people were really struggling with trying to come to grips with the fact that he had such a legacy, and this artwork was there to sort of immortalize things that we wanted to certainly reject outright. And that's the issue. So the one thing I'll add to that, again, is the aesthetic question, because it opened up a debate upon the aesthetic value of his artwork, which I've argued is an important question, but somewhat of a separate question. And as hard as it is to tease those two things out, we really have to do that, I think, if we're going to be true to the principles of artistic beauty.
And we can consider those principles of artistic beauty while also acknowledging that these scandals, like you've mentioned, are real moral concerns. And also, just for the record, as our listeners are listening to this, part of the conversation is that the scandals pertaining Marco Rupnik have not been solved. They're still ongoing. We're still awaiting news about the canonical trial, but also civil procedures.
That's right. And in fact, these are ongoing, and we are going to get results. We are going to get further indictments and perhaps also convictions. So it's a story that's not over, and it will endure simply because it's going to be up to local authorities as far as decisions on what to do with his artwork. So some places have already decided, in fact, to dismantle artwork or to cover it at least temporarily. And other places have basically made the decision to let it stand, at least for now. So this is not the end of the story. And as sad and as tragic as this story is, it does open up the door for, again, these deeper reflections on the connection between the moral and the artistic life. And again, Gaudí I used as sort of a foil here because there are many who don't like the work of Sagrada Familia and Gaudí's artistic output, and yet this is a man that his cause is open, and everybody attests to his saintliness, his prayer, his deep spirituality, and so we have a case to put beside the Rupnik case to kind of think through these deeper issues, and I do think they're important.
And I love that you mentioned that, despite the fact that it's in passing. I'd like to ask you to dive deeper. That one of the ways in which the human intellect is wired to contemplate beauty is that we tend to link it with the other transcendentals of truth and goodness. And so the perception of good art tends to come coupled with the soul's desire for ethics, for virtue, for morality. And that's precisely why the whole Marco Rupnik situation becomes such a catastrophe.
That's precisely the point. There's no way that these can be, that is between the good and the beautiful, that these can be disconnected as far as that tradition of the transcendentals, and there is a connection, and yet, and I take Jacques Maritain as a thinker who basically tried to pry open through Thomistic philosophy and theology that we are dealing with two different virtues here. And the way to summarize it is that the virtue of the artist, or the more technical language would be an artifacts or craftsman, is to produce something that's good. And the moral agent is to perfect the person, to perfect ourselves, basically, through good action. And the fact is that producing as an artist is an action that can be considered to be good or bad, but it's not in precisely the same way as moral action can be considered good and bad. And that's where the rub is.
And that's... go ahead, please.
No, and that's where I think people who are really interested in these issues, they have to just take a moment to kind of allow that distinction to sort of, I would say, shape the discussion and not to jump to very quick conclusions. Right.
Because, especially when it comes to Gaudí, for example, we've got eyewitness testimony to the sanctity, the prayerfulness of the man, and the nun, like you mentioned, the nun who served as his housekeeper believes he deserves to be canonized. So you've got a real juxtaposition here of a prayerfulness affiliated with the artistic life. But like you've just mentioned, we can't therefore presuppose one who engages in art is necessarily a saint.
That's exactly right. I will say that personally, my own testimony would be, and I have been at several of Rupnik's most famous sites of mosaics, including in the Vatican, where in a chapel that I used to pray regularly, the Redemptoris Mater chapter. And he was not the only artist involved in that, but his mark is certainly left on that. I have to say that I found it to be somewhat interesting, curious, but not conducive, at least in my case, to prayerful recollection. It was more conducive to a sort of instruction, which is important. Whereas Gaudí's work, so when I walk in Sagrada Familia, it's not automatically, my first impression is one of awe and stupor and it's only through time that it becomes a place of prayer for me. So in other words, first impressions are not the only impression we have about how artworks can foster and feed our spiritual lives and our prayer lives. And I think that's something also to keep very much in the minds and hearts of those who visit these sacred places. If I could just point out briefly that iconography, for example, in the Eastern tradition, so here's precisely where we have the lesson where it takes time for the spiritual eye to become one with the spiritual reality that these icons present. That's quite different from walking into St. Peter's, for example, where there is an awe and an inspiration, which it's certainly spiritual in some sense, but secular and not simply in the bad sense in another. And that also is something that people need to be aware of. So praying with art is a practice. In other words, it's something that's done over time. It's not something that we're going to get instantly or, let's say, almost automatically or miraculously. It's a practice, and iconographers of the East know this better than anyone.
When knowing about Gaudia's work, I want to ask if you could talk about how much he invested into the Sagrada Familia.
Yes, well, his entire life, quite short. So to the point of fasting, so not just neglecting meals, but he incorporated into a fasting. Communion and particularly meditation in the morning, starting every day with that meditation. He would stay basically in a makeshift bedroom in the basement, and so his entire life was absolutely dedicated to this. There's one other example of this, Michelangelo with his chapel. Absolute dedication to the work.
Well, I want to say thank you so much for making the time to speak with us. My guest has been Daniel Gallagher, lecturer in literature and philosophy at Ralston College in Savannah, Georgia. And we've been talking about Marco Rupnik and Antoni Gaudi, artists. Stay tuned, I'm Marcus Peter.
St. Therese once told her sister Celine that when we trust ourselves and not God, our soul becomes barren and incapable of virtue. Her remedy? External works of charity. We all try to do it on our own sometimes without asking for God's help. At St. Paul Evangelization, we suggest sharing the gospel with someone who needs it. Check out streetevangelization.com to find a team near you where you can share the love of Jesus. If there isn't one in your area yet, perhaps God is calling you to start a team in your city. To learn more, visit streetevangelization.com.
Welcome to Advanced Dentistry Center family. This is Dr. Metti, and our team strives to treat you like family in a loving and compassionate way as we focus on serving you in a Christ-like manner. We do this by emphasizing prevention and general well-being for a lifetime. Our private practice is small, personal, state-of-the-art, and innovative, with the goal to educate and motivate our patients in improving their oral health. It is through a partnership with you that you will achieve the goals for your smile. Advanced Dentistry is serious about the level of care we provide, with attention to details and an exceptional level of care, skill, and judgment. We are thrilled for the opportunity to serve you.
Dr. Matty and the team invite you to visit them at advanceddentistrycenter.com or call them at 248-594-9592. That's 248-594-9592. AdvancedDentistryCenter.com. Do you own popular index mutual funds or ETFs? If so, you're automatically own shares of companies that conflict with your moral beliefs. Ave Maria mutual funds are managed to conform to pro-life and pro-family values. Long-term investors can invest in the no-load Ave Maria mutual funds. The experienced professional portfolio managers make decisions based on investment fundamentals and pro-life values. You can learn more about Ave Maria mutual funds today at 866-AVE-MARIA or visit AveMariaFunds.com.
Marcus Peter hosts Unveiling the Covenants.
What is a covenant? It's a vowed exchange of lives which results in an unbreakable family bond. Throughout Scripture, God seeks to espouse all mankind to himself in an unbreakable covenant bond. His covenantal love is a free gift, but it necessitates a response from us. We are free to accept or reject it. Let's learn what this means as we unveil the covenants.
Saturday mornings at 11 and Sunday morning at 9:30 a.m. on Ave Maria Radio.
Ever thought you'd make a bundle by trading in or selling your used vehicle only to find out it's worth a dinner for two? Well, it's much more valuable to donate your vehicle to Ave Maria Radio. Thousands of Americans donate their vehicle each year. The donation to Ave Maria is easy, tax deductible, and supports our efforts to evangelize. A year from now, will you remember that dinner or your gracious and selfless donation? Go to AveMariaRadio.net to find out more. That's AveMariaRadio.net.
Catholic Charities of Shiawassee and Genesee counties have been providing health and creating hope since 1941. It's the generosity of donors that allows them to provide necessary services such as their warming center, which provides refuge and comfort to thousands in our community. They also offer hot meals in their soup kitchens and help families make ends meet in their community closet. Even the smallest donation makes a meaningful difference. Join us in their mission by giving a donation at CatholicCharitiesFlint.org.
This program brought to you in part by Ave Maria, Florida, a big kind of small town where golf carts take you everywhere and there's always something fun around the corner. Discover championship golf, resort-style amenities, and a town center full of shopping and dining. With Ave Maria University and Ave Maria Catholic Church at its heart, it's a community full of connection and charm. More than 25 model homes are available for viewing. More information can be found at AveMaria.com. That's AveMaria.com.
Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. Blaise Pascal, perhaps the first Christian apologist to address modern human beings utilizing secular terms, modern terms, and he presented a defense of the Christian religion in a public, secular Christian apologist way that actually resonates to this very day. We examine his thoughts and his work with Dr. Paul Seaton, who is an independent scholar. His area of intellectual interest and specialization include political philosophy and French philosophical thought. Paul has translated Pierre Manent's Challenging Modern Atheism and Indifference, Pascal's defense of the Christian proposition. Paul, thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm doing wonderfully well, and I enjoyed every word of your very accurate presentation of me, or as I like to say, I'd like to meet that fellow.
Well, you're very humble, Paul. And I want to say, first of all, my tremendous appreciation to this stellar work of translation that you've done. And before we go on any further, even before we talk about Pascal's thought process on Christian apologetics, we need to talk about Pierre Manent himself and how he's known particularly for political philosophy, but also how he dabbles into the reality of faith in the life of the state. If you could just present for us an overview of the person of Pierre Manent.
Okay. Do you want the 2-minute version, the 20-minute version, or the 2-hour version?
Tell you what, when you and I meet up for drinks one day, we can talk about the 2-hour version. Let's do 2 minutes.
Okay, very good. Born in 1949, retired from full-time teaching in 2014, had a wonderful teaching career, and is, if not the, which I believe, certainly one of the 2 or 3 most prominent political philosophers, not just in France, but in Western Europe. I say his career had 3 phases. Again, I'll be very brief. From about 72 to 94, during the Cold War, he was very interested in liberalism and its progeny, the modern liberal democratic regime, because it was threatened both practically and theoretically, both within and without. So the focus of his scholarship was why did modern human beings make this radical departure in political orientation and in political goals? Pause. Collapse of Soviet communism, 89-91. The political issue of the day in Europe was the status of the nation or the nation state, and then what would the new reunited Europe look like? And eventually it became the European Union. And very briefly, he's a fierce critic of the humanitarian and globalist EU and a staunch defender, although fully aware of its problems and vices, of the modern nation state. And then I'd say starting about 2014, while he's always, he was a Catholic convert, he's always shown the absolute centrality of the Catholic Church in the spiritual and political history of Europe. About 2014, he started more directly commenting on the state of the Church, the assault on the Christian roots of Europe by secular elites. And so this Pascal book that came out in 2022 is something of a culmination of a third phase where more explicit Christian themes, Catholic themes, have figured in his work.
How much of the unfortunate reality of Marx's influence in Europe shape the way Pierre Monand thought about political philosophy?
Well, during the Cold War, of course, he engaged seriously with Marx's writings, and he had a handful of, I think, very brilliant exegeses of different parts of Capital, for example. And he was the best student of the greatest anti-communist in France during this period, Raymond Aron. So both theoretically, but geopolitically, he paid great attention to the regimes that said that they were born out of Marxist thought. Pause. However, he thinks that Marxism as such has declined precipitously in Europe. And we Americans, we tend to talk in broad, I think, even crude terms of things like cultural Marxism. He doesn't use those kinds of phrases, doesn't think they're helpful. For him, the chief ideological category for the contemporary EU is something he calls the religion of humanity, in which we here in America call secular humanism, although I think he gives it a depth and a complexity that is missing in most of our discussions here in America.
Right. And because of his complexity, his capacity at taking what are ostensibly very sophisticated arguments pertaining to the political life of society and the state, and bringing to bear natural reason and the Christian revelation, we can then start discussing how he engages Pascal's work. I know that's painting with very broad strokes, but talk to us about how Pierre Monand approached the Christian apologetics of Blaise Pascal.
Okay. I'm going to say just two things, and then you can pick one or both or none of them to continue. In the third phase of his teaching, he regularly taught a course called The Modern Soul, and in it he studied Montaigne, Pascal, and Rousseau. And so he's been intimately engaged with Pascal's thought for, we'll say, roughly 2 decades. And it's quite striking, that phrase, the modern soul. We tend to think, well, modernity, it's soulless, it doesn't believe in the soul. There's a homely truth to that, but it's not completely true. So he studied and taught Pascal in conjunction with Montaigne, Pascal's predecessor, and then Rousseau, his successor, or at least someone who came after him. And then when he retired in 2014, he started producing books drawn from that seminar. So in 2014, he produced a book on Montaigne, and then in 2022, he published this book on Pascal. I'll add just one more thing, and then you can jump in. Pascal was there at the beginning. Well, the beginning of what? Well, the beginning of modern France and modern Europe. And you alluded to these features in your setup, in your intro. The modern state was being established by the Treaty of Westphalia and by the Sun King in France. A new form of society, still very hierarchical, but a hierarchy that had kind of hollowed out and was being challenged by other social orders and other currents of life and thought. And so Pascal, he took the measure of all that and said, how does that impact even the possibility and the intelligibility of Christian faith?
Right.
And he thought it was very problematic, and he thought long and hard, or hard and short, because he didn't live very long, to figure out how he could make the Christian faith intelligible to people swept up in modern politics, the modern economy, and modern society.
because of that, when we take a look at political philosophy as Pascal was dealing with it, one of the areas that we can also acknowledge, especially in modernity today, is that there's been owing to the Protestant Reformation, there's been a move of removing reason and logic from Christianity and the application of Christianity. Pascal was one of those people who saw the absolute need of reinserting the bearing and inquiry of reason and the faith in harmony to man's life in the public sphere. And that sets the basis for his political philosophy. Can you tell us more about that, please?
Yeah, and that's a very key aspect and point to make. Pascal was precocious. He was asking questions why when he was 2. He started learning Latin when he was 4, and then I'm going to leave out his education, but he knew logic inside and out.
So, Paul, let's stop there, because the music has just hit. We are continuing on the other side of the break with Dr. Paul Seaton, who has just translated this amazing work by Pierre Manant on Blaise Pascal's defense of the Christian proposition in the public sphere. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.
Resetting your password, unsubscribing from emails, printing anything. Why are simple things sometimes so complicated? Thankfully, with an auto owner's insurance independent agent, getting the right coverage for your business doesn't have to be one of them, so you can get back to more important things, like learning how that printer works. That's simple human sense.
Call Choice Insurance Agency at 734-641-4200. Beacon Skin and Surgeries is a comprehensive dermatology center on the border of Troy and Rochester Hills south of M59 and in Livonia. Beacon Skin and Surgeries perform full skin exams and focus on the diagnosis and treatment of all types of skin cancer and precancerous lesions. All are board-certified dermatologists and fellowship-trained surgeons. Call 248-852-1900. Beacon Skin and Surgeries, a beacon for patient care. 248-852-1900. The doctor is in Ann Arbor. Don't miss this chance to join Dr. Ray's studio audience for tapings of his hit TV show, Living Right with Dr. Ray.
The live audience makes the show.
The tapings are October 28th and 29th. 2 shows each night at 5:30 and 7:15 p.m. All shows are at Russell Video in Ann Arbor, and the cost is free.
Without the audience, there is no show.
Just sign up at AveMariaRadio.net.
Very much would love to see you.
This week on Christ is the Answer, we continue Father John's RCIA for Catholic series. Over the years of pastoring a church, Father John noticed that converts to Catholicism almost always seem to know their newly found faith much better than their cradled Catholic brothers and sisters. So he put together an RCIA for Catholic series. Join us this week as Father John talks about Luke 11:1 and how to pray like Jesus taught. Tune in for Christ is the Answer, Monday through Fridays at 11 a.m. on Ave Maria Radio.
Hello, Steve Ray here from Footprints of God Pilgrimages. The land of our Lord and Our Lady is calling us. We're heading back to the Holy Land over Christmas break this year. We have the best, most reliable guides and services awaiting us. The holy sites are open, and the local Christians are anxious to see us. Galilee, Jerusalem, Nazareth, Bethlehem. No crowds, no lines. Hope you can join us.
Find the Ave Maria Radio travel tab at AveMariaRadio.net. Call to Holiness returns to Laurel Manor in Livonia October 25th. The featured speakers are German Cardinal Gerhard Müller and the founder of the Doloran Fathers, Father Chad Ripperger. The Vatican Eucharistic Miracles photographic exhibition will also be on display, faithfully accounting many well-documented miracles. Register today at calltoholiness.com to join hundreds at Laurel Manor in Livonia October 25th. That's calltoholiness.com.
Support for this Ave Maria radio program comes in part by the non-for-profit St. Anthony Services. Are you shopping for mortgage products, Catholic investing, Catholic health, real estate, or estate planning? StAnthonyServices.org can help you find a Catholic professional for these needs. They regularly connect faithful citizens with faith-based professionals that share our Christian values. More information at StAnthonyServices.org or 877-LIFE-US1.
You like pizza? Me too. And for that, we can thank our friend Tom Monahan. First, he starts with $900 and opens one pizza shop. Then it's worldwide, thousands of shops. But all this was just a warm-up for his greatest achievement yet. He built a university.
God inspired Tom to build up generations of men and women who have a hunger to reach the world for Christ. This place is Ave Maria University.
Visit avemaria.edu to see what's next.
Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. I'm talking with Dr. Paul Seaton, who did this amazing work of translating Pierre Manent's Challenging Modern Atheism and Indifference. And this is a Pierre Manent's evaluation and analysis of Blaise Pascal's defense of the Christian proposition in the public sphere. So, Paul, you were telling us earlier about Blaise Pascal's brilliance, intellectual brilliance, and his drive to bring natural reason to bear upon his understanding of the faith, but also, by virtue of harmonizing the two, applying that to political philosophy, the way man ought to conduct himself in society.
Yes, Precocious begins to articulate it. He had a deeply personal experience of the life of the mind in its modern scientific forms. He made original and still classical contributions to modern experimental science. So when he talked about modern reason, modern science, he knew intimately what he was talking about. He therefore also knew the limits both of modern forms of reason and reason itself in terms of understanding and comprehending the revealed mysteries of faith. So I do want to maybe caution the listener and the potential reader of the book. Pascal was not, say, a Thomist, and he thought that natural reason tended to be motivated or fueled by self-love. I could develop that subject at much greater length. And so he thought that reason, as it ordinarily operated, needed to be shown its limits, and then the fact that what it really desires is infinitely above its reach, and that if it's going to attain what it desires, it's going to have to pray that what's infinitely above it has come down and come into its life, and therefore our Lord, as the mediator of God and man, is absolutely central to his thinking about the relationship between reason and faith, but also between, let's say, society and the church.
Right.
Mediation is a absolutely key term in Pascal's thought.
Because of this, we can then think about Pascal's thought in light of his confrontation of the then initially surging rise of modern atheism.
Yeah. Can I say Pascal fought a battle on at least three fronts, vis-a-vis the dawning absolutist state, which he thought you needed authority to have an orderly society, and he was actually for the monarchy over against the rebellious aristocrats. But he thought that there was a lot of overreach going on with Louis XIV, and that what that would do would be put the church in eclipse as the moral guide of a society, and the church would be tempted to either be supine, and that's kind of sort of what the Jesuits did according to Pascal, or just be a constant counter beautiful soul. And so he worked very hard to try to articulate the proper relationship between church and state and the individual Christian and government. And in the book that we're talking about, Pierre, I call him Pierre because he's a friend, nicely articulates what I think is kind of a middle way between this just being counter-revolutionary or countercultural, being an integralist, and being a social justice Catholic.
Right.
So there's a necessary distance between the individual church and an absolutist state, but proper deference or reverence to respect.
Right, and that was the way Pascal believed in exercising the proper order of reason and the faith in individual liberty, which was one of the things that he spent time thinking about well.
I think other than Augustine, for whom order or ordo is an absolutely central term, off the top of my head, I can't think of another thinker who makes ordra or ordo more central to his thought than Pascal.
Right.
And of course, Pascal, in some important senses, was a self-proclaimed follower or disciple of St. Augustine, although there are very interesting and important differences between the two. But certainly something like the famous phrase, a search for order, it characterizes both of these thinkers. Order of the church, order of the soul to the church and to God, and the right order of society.
When we think about the way Pascal thought about order and the context of the Catholic Church, for Pascal, even the way he thought about that order had to do with the eventual question of the flourishing of the human person, because he understood his operating premise was that the human person possessed a kind of inherent dignity.
I don't want to, how should I put it? Every Christian has to affirm that man is made in the image and likeness of God, and we're just a little lower than the angels, but that God became man and not became an angel. So in that sense, that absolutely fundamental sense, Pascal was a Christian and affirmed what we call human dignity. On the other side, I think one of the virtues of Pascal is he had very modest hopes for this world and this life.
Mm-hmm.
He and his family had experienced civil war for many years in France. Even with absolutism, there were a lot of tensions. So, very famously, Pascal said that the natural condition of a Christian is to be ill. Now, he meant it both literally and figuratively. And so I think he's a good antidote to our all too often kind of unchristian or unserious optimism about what things can be. And so I think he's good for us to read as, more progressivist Christians or hopeful Christians. That doesn't mean progressive Catholicism, but just, we're more hopeful about. He has more of that Augustinian, in social life, let's work for the pax of order, and then, the perfection of humanity. That's God's work. It's done individually, although it's reunited in the church, but that's God's work, and that'll be revealed in its fullness in God's good time.
And Pascal understood that. Pascal, he wasn't trying to argue for a kind of completely Catholic application and worldview to the public sphere. Like you mentioned, he had this kind of appeal that there's a teleology, there's an end to this, God's will be done. He did spend some time thinking about grace and the application of the life of grace in the human person's life and therefore in the state. If you could speak a little about that.
Yeah, any Augustinian or self-professed disciple of St. Augustine is going to think, and in Pascal's case, write a good deal about grace. And, just under God, just under the incarnation, maybe on the par with the sacraments, grace is a reality, but it's also mysterious. Mm-hmm. He talked a lot about it. And I think he kind of did it in a variety of ways. He engaged with some scholastic articulations of it in terms of primary and secondary and instrumental causality, right. But he did not particularly like that language. He really did think it was too mechanistic, and it didn't comport with the experience that we have of grace, and that he himself famously did in 1654 for 2 hours one night in November, where he really did have what we would call a mystical experience of the Lord and his presence and his ways. But grace, in his day, you've got the Protestants and the Catholics going back and forth over predestination and free will. And then you have, in the Catholic circles, the battle between the Jansenists and the Molinists or the Jesuits. So he was intimately aware of both of those battles.
Right.
And his great book, The Provincial Letters, it really is a tour de force of critiquing the Jesuits, and not only their laxity, but their infidelity to Augustine and, frankly, the Church's teaching on the sovereignty of grace and the reality of human will, but the absolute need for human beings to respond to it and then to follow its lead wherever it leads.
Right. Well, Paul, we're running out of time in the segment, and frankly, okay. I'm enjoying this so much. We've barely scratched the surface of your great book. By the way, I want to invite everyone to procure a copy of it. It's a very easy read. Paul Seaton, he translated Pierre Marnin's treatise on Blaise Pascal's defense of the Christian proposition, challenging modern atheism and indifference, again, published by Notre Dame Press. Now, Paul, before I let you go, I want to invite you to just say a word to all of our listeners as to why they ought to familiarize themselves with Blaise Pascal's thought more, considering the present age today.
That's a wonderful question. And I'll say the book itself, it's broken up into very identifiable parts, but the last 4 chapters are Pascal's experience and articulation of the Christian life, starting with repentance and conversion, then going through prayer, perseverance. So I would just say those last 4 chapters, as they say, are worth the price of admission. And it's the kind of book where you pick up and then you pause and you reflect on your own spiritual life.
Right. Well, Paul, that was a great way to end. Thank you very much for making time to speak with us.
My pleasure. Good luck and God bless.
My guest has been Dr. Paul Seaton, and he's translated Pierre Marnin's treatise on Blaise Pascal's Christian apologetics called Challenging Modern Atheism and Indifference. Thank you for joining us. I'm Marcus Peter.